Hello everybody, my name is Michael and welcome back to Last First. Azerbaijan Grand Prix time. Let's get into the predictions. It's going to be a good one. I've got some spicy predictions this week. Starting off in qualifying with P5, I'm going to go with Carlos Sainz. I think Ferrari are going to continue to be strong again this weekend. They have been in the past at Baku, and it seems like their upgrades are working to some extent. I think it's going to take beyond the Singapore Grand Prix to really see how those upgrades are working, because they have traditionally gone well at Baku, at Monza, at Singapore. But I think for the time being, they are performing, or I think they will perform well, and I think it's going to show in qualifying and in the race. I think Sainz will do a steady performance, but he does seem to be a bit on the back foot right now. So I've got him at P5. Next up at P4, I'm going with Max Verstappen. I think it is going to be a stronger weekend than it was at Monza, but I do think their struggles will continue. I just think Verstappen is going to outperform the car as he typically does. But yeah, I think they're going to be on the back foot again. It doesn't seem like they have any magic solution right now. I think it's going to take a few weekends to get this all sorted, but I think it should be a decent weekend for them, considering how poorly they did in Monza and how much they've been struggling. I think they're really going to struggle in Singapore, but beyond that, I think they'll start to get things a little more sorted. But for this weekend, I think Verstappen is going to really outperform the car, significantly outperform Perez again, because it wasn't that much different last time out. But I think he's going to do what he can with the car, and I think the car just isn't the fastest right now. So I'm going to go with P4 for Verstappen. All right, moving on to P3 and qualifying, I'm going to go with Lando Norris. I think he is going to not have the best of weekends, let's say. I think he's probably a little down after last weekend, and even though he performed incredible in Zandvoort, I think it has been a bit topsy-turvy for him. He could have and should have performed better last time out, and the car wasn't doing the best for him, wasn't exactly what he needed, and he was outperformed again by Piastri. So I think that's really going to be on his mind, not even including any potential start problems that he has. I wouldn't be surprised to see him struggle again with that. But I think he's going to be a little bit on the back foot again this weekend. And while I think he's still going to be ahead of Verstappen, I don't think it's going to be as significant as he needs it to be for championship going forward. P2, I'm actually going to go with Oscar Piastri. I am really getting behind Piastri right now, particularly after that move at Monza. I mean, that was spicy and really showed some intent on his behalf to really mark his authority and stamp his place in the team. And I think Piastri is really starting to come into his own now. He's starting to perform really well, and more consistently he's with or on top of Norris. And I think he's going to have another strong weekend this time out. And I think he's definitely going to be playing his part to spoil Norris's party of trying to win this championship at the end of the year. And, I think that just goes to show why the championship is such a long ways off for Norris. I mean, it's still 62 points. It's a little crazy to be talking about it as much as we are. But, everybody's talking about Piastri should have given Norris the win in Hungary, and McLaren should have done this and and Piastri should be giving up his places for Norris, but which I do think should have been the case in Monza, because second and third is no different. But Norris really hasn't shown that he is the emphatic number one there. He hasn't shown and proved, been consistent enough that he should be 100% backed and that he has a chance in this title fight, if that's what we want to call it anyways. I think Norris needs to be a bit more consistent and really get on top of Piastri to make Piastri and everybody else really support Norris even more. But I think Piastri is going to spoil that party, and I think he's going to qualify ahead of Norris and cause some problems for him in the race. Now, P1 in qualifying, I'm going with Charles Leclerc. I think it's tough to bet against him with the uptick in performance from Ferrari last time out, as well as his really solid track record here in Azerbaijan in the past, even with dogs of cars that Ferrari have produced in recent times. And I think he's going to pull another special bag out of the hat, or another special lap out of the bag, and get on pole position. And I think it will be close, but I think Leclerc is going to make one of those magic laps, and he's just going to make it count when it happens. I think McLaren will have a bit of a pace advantage over Ferrari once again, but Leclerc and the streets of Baku are just something special, and I think he is going to pull it out for pole position. Woohoo! Let's get on to my predictions for the race, starting with P5, going with George Russell. I think Mercedes is going to be a little bit on the back foot again this weekend. I think they're probably going to be the third fastest team behind Ferrari and McLaren. And I think they're going to be thereabouts, but just behind enough where they're not really going to be in contention for a win. And I think they're just going to pick up some decent points and do what they can. Even though they did seem to have a turn in their understanding and in their performance with races like Spa. They do seem to be a bit on the back foot again and not 100% understanding where some of their pace has gone. So that's definitely worrying, but I still think overall I have more confidence in them now than I did, even just a few months ago, say nothing about a year ago or so. So I think they'll have a decent race. Okay, so P4, I'm going with Lewis Hamilton. Now, you might be starting to think wow, this is vastly different than my qualifying predictions. What is going to come next, and what do I think is going to happen? And we will certainly get on to that. But once again, like I mentioned with George Russell, I think Mercedes is just going to be thereabouts, and they're going to be able to, let's say, pick up any pieces of the race and just take full advantage of what they can. And I think, once again, Hamilton is going to be able to, or he'll be the stronger racer on race day. I wouldn't be surprised if Russell out-qualifies him again, but I think in the race, Hamilton is just continuing to show that he is stronger, and I think he will get ahead of Russell over the course of a race distance. So I think it'll be a nice 4-5 for Mercedes with some decent points in the bag. All right, now with P3, I'm going with Carlos Sainz. I think he is going to be the less strong of the Ferrari drivers this weekend, but I still think it's going to culminate in a solid podium for Carlos Sainz. I think he'll just be consistent over the weekend and over the race, and I think he'll be able to pick up a good result where one probably didn't seem too likely until some specific events occur. So I'm going to go with P3 for Sainz. P2, I'm going to go with Max Verstappen. Once again, you can see something's weird going on, something I feel crazy is going to happen. And I think Verstappen will also be there to pick up the pieces. Like I said, I think the Red Bull is still going to be struggling, but I think Verstappen is going to be able to take the most out of the car and really outperform it. And I think because of that, it'll get him ahead of Sainz and get him ahead of Russell and Hamilton, even though I think the Red Bull it could be the fourth quickest team this weekend again. It's definitely very possible, but I'm sure it will be thereabouts with Mercedes and more than likely Ferrari, but definitely with Mercedes. P1 for the race, I'm going with Charles Leclerc. I think he will actually convert this pole position into a win, but I think it will be because of the two McLaren drivers crashing out. Yes, I could see this happening. I think these papaya rules are going to burn up in flames, and I think it's going to be a terrible result for McLaren. I'll just go into it now. They're my bold prediction. That McLaren is going to have a collision. I think Norris is really going to want to get back on top and get ahead of Piastri. I think he's going to be really aggressive like Piastri was on him, and I think it's going to cause them to crash. I don't know that they'll necessarily both DNF or anything like that, but I think it will get them out of the top 5 and completely ruin any hope of Norris having a title fight this year. I can imagine it being something similar to Ricciardo and Verstappen, where they're racing each other really hard and then they just go over that line a little bit and boom, they crash. I can see it in the stars just after everything that's been happening. I could really envision it happening. But because of that, I think Leclerc in particular and the rest of the drivers there are going to be able to pick up the pieces from McLaren, and Leclerc's going to bring home another win for Ferrari. Masterclass of the weekend, I'm going to go with Ali Behrman. He absolutely dominated F2 last year at the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, and I think he's going to continue that good run of form just in an F1 car with Haas. Haas have been still kind of on the fringes of points, but I think Behrman's going to have a really strong weekend, and maybe he might mess around and outperform Hülkenberg in the race. I could see it happening just because of how well he did in Baku last year out in F2. But yeah, I think he's going to have another superb weekend, just like he did at, Saudi Arabia when he stepped in for Carlos Sainz, I believe. So I think he's going to be my masterclass of the weekend and have a really great race. Now, while I feel confident that there's a good chance that the McLaren duo will collide, I don't feel good enough to double down on them and go with them as my disaster class of the weekend as well. So I'm going to go with Aston Martin as my disaster class of the weekend. I think it's going to be really ironic and really telling of them just signing Adrian Newey, and now they're going to perform even worse than they have been in the past few races and really overall this season. I think they're just going to perform really poorly. They don't have a good balance in their car, and they've been struggling with porpoising problems, and I think all these things are going to show through on the streets of Baku, and I think it's going to be a tough weekend out for Aston Martin. All right, so those are my predictions for the Azerbaijan Grand Prix this coming weekend. They are pretty spicy and pretty bold, but I think they very could come true. So I'm looking forward to seeing what happens in this race. Even if there isn't a McLaren collision, I think it's still going to be really interesting, and it's going to be great to see how some of the storylines play out over the course of the weekend, and I think we'll be in for another good race. So thank you all for tuning in. Give me a follow on social media. I'm on X as F1rst, first spelling F1rst, and on Instagram as F1rst. Of course, you can follow me on any social or on any podcast platform, Apple, Spotify, Google, and also I started a blog. So feel free to check that out, F1rst.wordpress.com. Again, first spelled F1rst. So thank you all for tuning in, and let's get ramped up for the Azerbaijan Grand Prix.